you all for joining me today. And Kayvon, I'm going to start with you on this one. When the president says that the chances are less than 50-50, or when he says that we would still walk away from something like this, do you actually believe them?
Not entirely, no, because they've invested so much political capital into this process, both Obama, John Kerry, Wendy Sherman, that it would be such a negative consequence for them to just walk away from it as a result. So, you know, another deadline has passed. I think that it's more important that they take the time now to deal with these really technical issues and achieve perfect clarity in the negotiations phase, rather than walk away from it and have total, you know, somewhat different interpretations in the implementation phase, which could lead to a total conflict here. So ultimately, you know, if it happens a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month from now, I think it's more important that they take their time and get it right.
But is it also, Michael, maybe a little bit of a political strategy to not set expectations too high?
Yeah, that's right. And I think I agree with Kayvon that this is the most important goal of the Obama administration in its last year and a half or so of being around. And I think they are totally invested in it, no matter what the Iranians say, no matter sort of the way that these negotiations are going, because I think they know that if a Republican is elected president, that it's going to be impossible for some deal like this to happen, and I think that's why there's a sense of urgency, even though they're sort of tamping that down and saying, "Oh, we'll walk away." I don't think all these deadline extensions reflect that any interest in walking away. So I think we're going to see this extended for as long as they can. The Iranians, that's another question, whether or not they see, if we can't get a deal out of this, maybe we'll just pursue this anyway while we can, before a potentially Republican president is elected, and might come down harder on us as we try to get nuclear capabilities.
Yeah, I mean, that's something to keep in mind too, though, right? Is what Iran is concerned about in terms of the next presidential election here in the United States.
And I don't think extending the deadlines is necessarily a bad thing. It's just part of that's how negotiations go. But I think it is important that the Obama administration is sort of, in a public sense, calling Iran out, just pointing out that there are things that they agreed upon back in April that now they're edging away from, that they're told us, saying that, well, we didn't promise to do that. So I think it's an important, like before, in April, they promised that they would allow international inspections of some of their facilities, and that they would provide information about some of their past attempts at accessing military and nuclear information. That was agreed upon back then, and now they're sort of edging away from that. So I think he's sort of making the case, it might be on the global stage like a PR thing, of saying, look, you need this deal, we want it, but you need it. So the negotiations have to reflect that. And just to keep it, also to remind people that as much as our administration may be invested in this, the Iranian people are by far more invested on their end. Like the average American, I don't think is following it as closely as the average Iranian right now.
But don't you think that the extension of the deadline actually shows that the United States, or at least the Obama administration, needs this more? I mean, the fact that
it shows that they're all in, that they're committed to it.
Right. Well, I think it maybe demonstrates to the Iranians that they've got a desperate actor here in John Kerry and President Obama. They need a deal, and I think that's being paid attention to in Iran.
But you could also say at the extension of the deadline, Nicole, means that the Obama administration isn't that scared of Republicans, right? Because now, as we mentioned, instead of 30 days, the Republican Congress is going to have 60 days to look over it and approve it, and there has certainly been a lot of opposition, but they are letting that fly in the face of that.
And I think that's right. I think that Obama, while he wants a deal, is not going to make a bad deal, because when we talk about his legacy, he wants to leave a legacy that is long-lasting and standing. And so if the deal's not right, he'll continue to negotiate. But if it's not, and they can't move it forward, I think he's going to stay.
But it's also, I mean, also from the beginning, I think the Iranians have made major concessions here, and we have to use that as kind of a starting point too. Michael and I were talking about this earlier. I mean, you have to start off from the point that Iran, as a non-weapon signatory to the NPT, has the right to produce nuclear power for peaceful purposes. Now, the issue at stake here now is how far does Iran need to go to sufficiently ensure the international community that its domestic nuclear program will remain for purely peaceful purposes. The concessions that they made in the original JPOA, which is a really short 2-page document, I think the viewers should read it, it's bullet pointed, goes well beyond the NPT and the additional protocol to place a limit on the stockpiles of uranium, to place a limit on the type and quantity of centrifuges, to set up a protocol to allow for even inspections of non-military sites, because the NPT, non-nuclear sites, because the NPT really only gives the IAEA access to declared nuclear sites. So we've made huge progress on this issue, and part of the reason that, I think the main reason, the primary reason that so much progress has been made in this round and not during the 2003 to 2006 with the Europeans, is that the Obama administration shifted from a policy of zero to limited enrichment. And once that major shift took place, the two sides, as well as their negotiating partners, the P5+1, were able to start to find some common ground on that issue.
Well, something called compromise. But Michael, no matter what, is there anything that those who are vocally opposed in Congress, mostly on the Republican side, is there anything that isn't a bad deal? Is there such a thing as a good deal with Iran?
Sure, I think so, and I think it would be along the parameters that President Obama originally outlined when he set out to make this deal, which was that Iran would not engage in nuclear weapons, uranium enrichment, that sort of level.
Going back to the zero enrichment.
And more importantly, and I think this is important, you talk about the concessions that Iran has made, I think there are some bigger, more important things that Iran has not conceded on. You know, if you're an Iranian who's gay, who fears for their life that they might be hanged or if you're a woman in Iran who doesn't have the access to basic human rights, I mean, any deal that doesn't have the regime in Iran pulling back on those terrible policies is a loser, and I think that is the most important thing to keep in mind here.
But why should that be part of the same deal? I mean, it's no question, yes, right, that there are certain human rights violations that the United States is opposed to happening in Iran, as there are in many other countries with which the United States is actually allied and works with all the time.
Because we've got a regime in Iran that is not only doing all those things and violating human rights, they are funding terrorism against the United States and our allies, Israelis as well as our Arab allies. They have said here that Israel should be wiped off the face of the earth. I mean, this is our strongest ally in the region. I don't think we need to be making any concessions about that could lead to nuclear weapons proliferation in Iran, because you're going to see a nuclear weapons sort of arms race in the Middle East. That's not good for, I think, America's standing in the region.
So does anybody find it odd that we're still having nuclear weapons arms races, too? I mean, it really does seem something that is very, very last century.
Yeah, this is old technology. There's nothing new about this. But Michael made some really important points that I think are worth further inspection here. Because ultimately, to me, this is not just a deal that's about centrifuges and uranium enrichment. This is about the core issue of mistrust between the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran. There are huge issues that separate these two countries for the past 36 years. And unfortunately, an honest inspection of this relationship has to conclude that the mistrust runs both ways, that both sides have really harmed each other since the post-Cold War era. So the United States naturally views Iran as an anti-American revolutionary power, which it is, which does all the things that Michael referred to. But Iran, at the same time, views the United States as an imperial power in the region that overthrew its prime minister in 1953, Mohammad Mossadegh, that they believe wants to overthrow the Islamic Republic, that supported Saddam Hussein for 8 years, even while he was engaging in chemical weapons warfare, that downed an Iranian airliner. I mean, I could go on. I don't want to, but there's a laundry list on both sides. So what needs to happen now is that the two sides need to stop viewing each other through that lens. The United States needs to stop viewing Iran just through this revolutionary lens, and Iran needs to stop viewing the U.S. through this purely imperial lens, and they need to start to see each other as sovereign nations that have interests in the region and start to cooperate where there are shared interests and start to find compromises on areas where they clearly disagree, because there are plenty of them. Yeah. And Iran...
So maybe in this area, let the past be the past and try to focus on,
but there's current issues too. I mean, look,
look like for the future.
We were talking about this earlier too. Iran, I mean, you have to look to the principles in the Islamic constitution. And one of them basically says that Iran is neither east nor west. They're trying to chart their own independent foreign policy. And that foreign policy often in the region is totally at odds with the United States, such as in Syria or in Yemen. But ultimately, I think that they need to find some kind of compromise on it. And what the nuclear issue, if it's successfully accomplished, would do, for me, I think it's going to set a precedent whereby diplomatic engagement will have peacefully resolved such a thorny international issue that's been a problem for the past 15 years.
Diplomacy, who would have thought? All right, guys, we've got to move on to our next topic, but hopefully by Monday we can say that some type of an agreement has actually been reached.